I am where few people that visit Gettysburg, Pennsylvania go. We're not in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We're actually, I believe we're about 20 miles to the southwest of Gettysburg. We're in a little location called Monterey Pass. This was the site of the longest territorial battle of the American Civil War, fought in 2 states, 4 counties, the only battle to be waged on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. And it was also one of the most confusing battles ever fought. On this edition of Retracing History, we will talk about Robert E. Lee's retreat out of Pennsylvania, particularly the fighting that occurred here July 4th and 5th, 1863, in a torrential thunderstorm. This is the Battle of Monterey Pass on Retracing History. The story of this peculiar battle can be traced back to the afternoon of July 3rd, 1863. Robert E. Lee, General of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, rested his hopes on a frontal assault against a Union line he perceived to be weak. The ensuing assault, now known as Pickett's Charge, was soundly repulsed by the Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by General George Gordon Meade. With the initiative of the Gettysburg Campaign now in the hands of the Union, Lee had to find a way to get out of enemy territory as soon as possible. In some ways, the retreat from the bloody fields around Gettysburg would be a reverse of last week's movements. Lee settled upon 2 routes of retreat out of Pennsylvania. The cavalry of General John D. Imboden would escort a wagon train through the Cashtown Gap, then down the Cumberland Valley. Meanwhile, General William Grumble Jones would use his cavalry to cover another wagon train across South Mountain via the Monterey Pass and toward Hagerstown, Maryland. The Confederates were under the impression there were no easy routes that the Union could use to outpace their direct approaches toward the Potomac River at Williamsport, Maryland. On the morning of July 4th, Union troops on top of Little Round Top observed Confederate forces retreating toward South Mountain. While General Meade was hesitant to move the Army of the Potomac after 3 bloody days of fighting, General Judson Kilpatrick was unwilling to let the Confederates escape so easily. With the commanding general's approval, Kilpatrick detached multiple regiments of cavalry to pursue. With assistance from the local population, Union officials were made aware of the strategic importance Monterey Pass held for Lee's planned retreat. Kilpatrick hoped his cavalry could block Lee from returning to Maryland. By the evening of July 4th, Jones had his cavalry protecting the wagon train of Richard Ewell's corps upon the Mariah Furnace Road. A trace of this road is preserved as part of the Monterey Pass Battlefield. At around dusk, and in an intense thunderstorm threatening to engulf the mountain, elements of the 5th Michigan Cavalry came into contact with the 1st Maryland Cavalry of the Confederate Army, just a few miles east of the pass. The fight for Monterey Pass was on. The Michigan Cavalry's brigade commander, General George Armstrong Custer, soon called for other regiments to probe the slopes of the Mariah Furnace Road. As dark settled and the rain increased, it quickly became difficult to discern the Confederate strength. In fact, only 30 troopers of the 1st Maryland, commanded by Captain George Emick, were holding the pass. Emick attempted to halt the wagon train so it would not be overran by a Union breakthrough. Jones overruled Emick, promising reinforcements should he hold out just a little bit longer. At the intersection of the Mariah Furnace Road and the Waynesboro-Emmitsburg Pike, the Confederates had a lone cannon to guard the pass, a piece that only had 5 rounds in its caisson. Nevertheless, the mere presence deterred Union advances directly into the intersection. Custer's Michigan Brigade continued trying to probe the Mariah Furnace Road. Confederate reinforcements in the form of Virginian and North Carolinian cavalry regiments relieved Emick's troopers, who were out of ammunition. The treacherous terrain that is now preserved by the battlefield park explains why Custer could not simply run over the Confederate line. Although these were cavalry units clashing, they had to fight dismounted. If the rocks and forests were bad enough, remember that it was a blinding thunderstorm that night. Just to throw one more complication into the mess, soldiers on both sides were trying to protect themselves from the rain in either rubberized blankets or ponchos. The material was made by Tappan India rubber trees. Charles Goodyear, the namesake of the famed tire company, developed a formula for a surface cure to create such water-resistant fabrics. This poncho belonged to Lieutenant Colonel James Deems of the Union 1st Maryland Cavalry, one of the units that fought at Monterey Pass. Goodyear buttons have also been excavated from the skirmish sites across South Mountain. As the clock struck midnight into July 5th, the Confederates still held the pass. Custer had redirected his attacks into charges down the pike toward the Monterey Furnace Road. Although the men of the 5th and 6th Michigan were equipped with the Spencer repeating rifle, the poor visibility did not give them any advantage. While attempting to rally his men, Custer's horse was shot and the general was thrown to the ground, surprisingly unscathed. Kilpatrick would soon arrive as both musket and thunder shared the air on top of South Mountain. After positioning 2 pieces of light horse artillery 100 yards east of the intersection, Kilpatrick sent the 1st West Virginia Cavalry to assist Custer. Major Charles Capehart led the West Virginians in a charge that, combining with the Michigan regiments, finally broke through the Confederate line near where the turnpike crossed Red Run. The lone Confederate cannon was overturned near the local toll gate house just across the stream as the Union cavalry tore into the Confederate wagon train in both directions. From there, chaos poured down South Mountain and into Maryland. While Custer's brigade tore up the Confederate wagons, Kilpatrick detached the 1st Vermont Cavalry down the mountain in a hope to cut off the Confederates in the town of Leitchburg. To the credit of General Jones, he was able to hurry Confederate cavalry through town and continue into Hagerstown, where Union and Confederate cavalry would clash in the streets twice in the following week. By dawn on July 5th, the Battle of Monterey Pass had come to an end. All told, the fighting had occurred across 20 miles of mountainous terrain on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. 1,300 Confederates were taken prisoner, many of whom were wounded soldiers from the Battle of Gettysburg. In addition, the Confederates reported approximately 300 wagons being lost that night. The Union cavalry confiscated what bounty they could before setting fire and rolling the wagons over the side of South Mountain, a sight no eyewitness would forget. Surprisingly, only 5 Union soldiers had been killed, 10 Union soldiers were wounded, and 28 were missing. The Confederate death toll from that night has never been determined. Tactically, however, Kilpatrick's attack achieved little in the way of blocking Lee's retreat. The main body of Confederate infantry would pass without incident through Monterey Pass throughout July 5th and 6th, and would safely be across the Potomac River by the middle of the month. While the battle did not greatly alter the course of the Civil War, it was a harrowing experience for the soldiers of both sides. When recalling the conflict, the battle with the most vivid memory for veterans was Monterey Pass, due to its imposing environment of rocky terrain, thick forest, thunder, lightning, and rain. The fighting across South Mountain that night is a reminder that Gettysburg, the bloodiest military engagement to occur within the United States, was not an isolated affair. For these reasons, and let's be honest, the sheer fact of having the title of only battle fought on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line, the Monterey Pass Battlefield Park now exists. The Friends of the Monterey Pass formed in 2011 with the purpose of preserving the ground on which this peculiar engagement was waged. In 2015, they opened a small museum to house its growing collection of artifacts and exhibits. At present, the park consists of 125 acres that preserve a portion of the Monterey Furnace Road and sites of the Union breakthrough at the intersection. Trails ascend Monterey Peak, where an observation platform provides a spectacular view of the topography both armies had to traverse. For a small all-volunteer organization, their museum houses an impressive collection. Just about every accoutrement a typical Union cavalryman would have had on them is represented, with original pieces. The battlefield relics on display were primarily unearthed by residents of the Monterey Pass area, including parts of a Confederate battery forge that was destroyed the night of the battle. The exhibits thoroughly cover the events and characters of the battle, and it's not just limited to the soldiers. 17-year-old Henrietta Zieglinger, whose family lived a short distance from the pass, was assisting the 1st Michigan Cavalry as a guide in locating paths they could use to attack the Monterey Furnace Road. A lieutenant later praised Henrietta's character and disposition in guiding the regiment up and down the mountain that unforgettable night. So, that's as best as I can explain the Battle of Monterey Pass. The best way to understand this battle, you have to come visit Monterey Pass Battlefield. It's not far from Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. We're right on the Mason-Dixon line where I'm standing at the moment. Okay, it's a little bit down that way, but you're getting my drift. This is a part of not just American Civil War history, not just Pennsylvania history, but United States history in general that nobody thinks about. The aftermath of the bloodiest battle in American history. How were they able to pull the Confederate soldiers across Potomac River? And although a lot of people say the Union Army didn't try to stop Lee, as you can clearly see, at least the cavalry tried to stop him. It could have been a lot different had the cavalry had reinforcements here and had gone here earlier. Who knows what it could have been? But that is history. Well, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to Redoubt Productions. If you want to go the extra mile supporting me, you can buy me a cup of cappuccino through my Ko-fi page, link in the description below. Thank you guys for watching. We're going to see you in the next episode.
It's actually pretty nice hiking trails and stuff back here.
And it seems like they're well marked too. So
Yeah, well,
it's a shame we didn't have like a little more time, but
Yeah.
well, always a return trip.
Yeah, absolutely.